Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. We tend to take children for granted on just how intelligent they can be. Now, how their intelligence is used depends on their personality. Some might use it to do well in school, but a lot of others will use it to be a kid. That means selfishness, integrity, mischief, and most of all, love. As adults, we forget that intelligence can have an effect on those parts of a personality. During the 80s and 90s, no writer knew how to portray young people as honestly as Jon Hughes did. Though he would tackle a lot of different parts of youth and revolt, today's movie focuses on a child who's put into full force when he's accidentally left behind. Without a way to contact his parents, and even feeling like that his wish had magically come true, the world becomes his. A world of cheese pizza, constant ice cream sundaes, and to quote the movie, eating junk and watching rubbish without consequence. But when he finds his home in Target, he has to use his own imagination to fend off some crooks. For a lot of people, this sounds like the premise of a corny kids movie. But when you see the name Jon Hughes attached to it, it would become a lot more. It would become the essential 90s Christmas movie. It would become a model for family films for a long time. It would become one of the highest grossing comedies of all time. This is the Christmas classic, Home Alone. So keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Let's go for a ride. Through a modern lens, people seem to see the work of Jon Hughes as very white and focused on a more upper-middle-class environment. This will usually mean that both parents are working to support their income, the houses are large and adjacent to similar homes, and that the goal of most people is to keep up the consistent appearance of success, or as often said, keeping up with the Joneses. That's not to say there's truth within that observation. It's just that there was once a time when Hollywood wasn't too keen on telling stories in those environments. Not only did Jon Hughes take advantage of that empty gap, but those environments would become the outer layer, while the context would reveal a new generation that bears witness to a way of life. One that's not so easily one size fits all. In fact, he knew that teens and kids would be having their own lives and adventures, while mom and dad are more focused on work. When you're the youngest of 5 siblings, there's going to be an understanding that everyone's fighting for attention. Played by Macaulay Culkin, Kevin McAllister is finding his place at home lost, especially with his aunt, uncle, and several cousins staying over. They're all getting ready to spend the holidays in Paris, where Kevin's father's brother lives with his own family. Anyone who's traveled overseas, especially around any holiday, will tell you that the day before going is going to be chaos. Dad's gathering the tickets and passports, mom's ensuring everything at home will be safe while they're away, uncle is pining for his self-deserved free trip, older brother is hoping to see some French babes and nude beaches, forgetting he's going during winter. Older sister is being a snark, the cousins are running around like crazy. All Kevin wants is a little peace and quiet. When he hits his boiling point and sent upstairs as punishment, he wishes everyone away. Through coincidental circumstances that force the family to leave in a rush, Kevin gets his wish the next morning. No parents to wake him, no sibling to fight with, no Uncle Frank to call him a little jerk, just a giant house all to himself. What makes Jon Hughes a prolific writer was not just knowing in what young people think, but also how they think. I've always loved how at first, Kevin is surprised that his family disappeared into thin air, no pun intended, but then he thinks about the negative moments from the previous night, giving him sudden justification before gaining a smile while again saying, "I made my family disappear." Jon Hughes knew that a kid like Kevin would take time to embrace his wish before worrying. In fact, Kevin's progress into growing up happens in stages. First, he's happy as a clown. Without an older brother to stop him, he's going through a stash of Playboy magazines and firecrackers. With no mom, he's eating whatever he wants. At first, anything goes. The next stage is fright, once cat burglars Harry and Marv enter the scene, and Kevin realizes that having his parents home might be a good idea. Even when he first attempts to conquer his fear, he encounters Old Man Marley, who, according to neighborhood rumors, is a killer. But this is also where his concerns start to set in, such as, where's my toothbrush? Stage 3 is cleverness, where he knows he's going to have to start becoming responsible in order to keep himself and the house steady. This means getting groceries, or should I say, stealing a toothbrush, and even facing the fear of the basement to do laundry. He now knows that even as a small 8-year-old, he's resourceful enough to do things on his own. He even uses a gangster movie, Angels with Filthy Souls, to order a pizza without discovery by the delivery guy, even though he's probably scarred him for life. At the 4th stage, which happens when he realizes he can't fool Harry and Marv anymore into thinking his family's home, is bravery. With the phone lines still down, he can't call the police for help, so he decides to stop them himself. He uses anything in the house as a weapon or a tool for something more elaborate. Nails, ornaments, heat lamps, irons, micro machine cars, paint cans, and even a live tarantula are booby traps. Even with the injuries received, Harry and Marv set out to get this kid, not wanting the reputation that an 8-year-old put them in jail. Kevin continues his mischief until he's outsmarted by the burglars. It's only when Old Man Marley comes in that Kevin is saved. He probably would have not showed up had Kevin not shown bravery earlier in the movie. He saw Marley earlier at the local church, where he was already surprised to see the scary man going in for Christmas Eve service. Kevin does see a sweet old man, in which the darker rumors are not true, but he also sees something scarier, himself. He thought he'd enjoy being alone and not having to deal with any family, but there's something about hearing this elderly man talk about not communicating with his own family in years that's really sad. Kevin does see the sadness and tries to persuade him to reach out, even if it doesn't change anything. Being brave is also about walking into anything without a guarantee of safety. By the end, Kevin hits the final stage, coming of age. His family has returned on Christmas morning, giving him joy for the people he loves, unlike how he felt 3 days earlier. Within that time span, Kevin's own intelligence put him to the test, and he was able to hold it together without much help. His family is surprised that along with doing fine, he was even able to do some grocery shopping. But most importantly, Kevin matured with the newfound life lesson on the importance of family and loved ones, even when we fight with them. Jon Hughes knew that he crafted something that families were going to like. Children could relate with Kevin, bearing witness to the mischief cranked to a maximum and showing that kids are more capable than adults can imagine. And of course, laugh at the pratfalls and slapstick at the traps. Speaking of which, adults could also connect with a story about a child who grows up appreciating the moral about staying connected with family, especially with the film's holiday time frame. Such a simple idea would become a monster hit and would be the guiding point for the majority of family films in the 90s to emulate. So, when did I first see it? Today we have the honor of going back to something that's very personal. That's because Home Alone is the very first movie that I recall seeing in theaters. It was 1990 and I was only 3 years old. My family and I had moved from the Los Angeles area into the inland valley of Marietta and Temecula. At the time, both places were still small commuter towns and only had 2 movie theaters. We went to the Temecula Cinema, which as of 2021 is still open and operates as a fun discount theater. I still remember waiting outside in a long line. I still remember sitting in a crowded theater. But being a 3-year-old, that's all I remember. What I do remember is how many times I rewatched it at home, even outside the Christmas season. I had a lot of days where my brother and I would recreate the family running around in the airport or pretending to be the burglars and practicing our own pratfalls when the traps were done. It was something I absolutely loved as a kid. As an adult, I still love the movie. It would become a part of my Christmas canon every year, meaning it was a guarantee that I would watch it at least once every holiday season. Is it my number 1 Christmas movie? It's up in my personal top 5. And yes, even though I still like the slapstick moments fine, I've really come to appreciate the coming-of-age story of Kevin McAllister. It's become a great reminder of how to write a great on-screen child. Home Alone has a surprising history that not only highlights a movie that almost didn't work, but it manages to reveal a side about a writer who was in the middle of a big change of his career. What was Jon Hughes going through? What was the experience like for a kid who was about to become the biggest child actor? And how did the film perform incredibly strong even after the holidays? Well, let's ring out the bells and look at the history of Home Alone. In the mid-80s, Jon Hughes had made a name for himself as the go-to storyteller of teen comedies. 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off all explored the suburban landscape of teenagers who were finding their identity in a boomer-dominated world. They were well aware that their lives as they knew it were about to end, and start over when they went to college. Whether they wanted to emulate their parents or attempt to divert depended on the kid, but most got the sense that the middle-class suburban lifestyle had something of a robot-like mentality, as in this was all one should expect out of this life. In a bad teen movie, it would have been easy to make all the adults villains and the high school kids the saviors of the future, the ones who would fix every problem that are the result of a generation that didn't know better. Jon Hughes wanted to show that number 1, people continue to dream well into their adulthood, that everyone is always going to want more. Number 2, that it's such a big world out there that it's natural that even the smartest kid isn't going to have a full comprehension on how things can be fixed. But number 3, and most importantly, that there's always more than what's on the surface, and that can be used in good and bad ways. These were all things Jon Hughes included in all of the scripts, even the ones that weren't teen-focused. In fact, Jon also liked focusing his stories on the parents as much as the kids. Mr. Mom, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles highlighted family relationships under the worst circumstances, with the parents trying their best no matter how flawed they are. Parents can be stupid. Parents may not have a plan B when plan A is broke. Parents can even forget how to balance work and home life. Jon was not afraid to show that parents could be just as naive as their kids are, sometimes even at the same time. Coming of age could happen at any age. Jon Hughes was planning a vacation with his family sometime between 1987 and 1988 when he was checking to ensure that he had everything: luggage, books, documents, credit cards, like a lot of people do. To quote him directly, I was going away on vacation and making a list of everything I didn't want to forget. I thought, well, I better not forget my kids. And then I thought, what if I left my 10-year-old son at home? What would he do? This is where Home Alone was first thought of. He took a break from packing and jotted down 8 pages of notes. Some was the story, and some were ideas for scenes. What he wanted right out of the get-go was using an element that children were most afraid of: burglars. Hughes took his vacation, but was immediately back to work on a variety of projects. His first non-teen directorial project, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, had shown he was more than comfortable with trying something different. Other movies he would be working on included She's Having a Baby, The Great Outdoors, and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. The latter itself has a ton of story, and I'll get around to that at a later point. Home Alone was written at around the same time, allegedly over a short period. I can't clarify that, but John Hughes does have a talent for cranking out impressive scripts, including The Breakfast Club's first draft, only in one weekend. Because John had also mentioned he had a 10-year-old, writing a child character wouldn't have been that challenging. After all, he was already including 2 supporting child characters in his other movies, with most at least having a good line or 2. Even his next directing project, Uncle Buck, would give the 2 youngest siblings prominent screen time. Miles, the only boy in the family, would be played by Macaulay Culkin. I'll get into how he got casted into Home Alone later on. John finished his draft for Home Alone and kept working on other projects. But he was ready to set it up when his busy schedule allowed it. I wanted to see if I could uncover why John Hughes himself didn't direct Home Alone, but I wasn't able to discover an exact reason, as John himself rarely gave interviews. If I had to guess, it may have had to do with the fact that he was just more interested in writing than he had directing. John was smart enough to know that as long as he had the right director, then his intention and story would have still come out. He was also in that position in which he was able to hire whoever he wanted. He first wanted to hire special effects artist Patrick Reed Johnson, but he was already committed to Space Invaders. He then approached Chris Columbus. Chris Columbus was a young filmmaker fresh out of NYU who got his big break with a script for a Joe Dante film, a little unknown movie called Gremlins. Being a Steven Spielberg production that was also a large hit, Chris was put to work writing more movies like The Goonies, Young Sherlock Holmes, and even an unused Indiana Jones story. He would then direct 2 movies that had opposite outcomes. First, with Adventures in Babysitting, which had a John Hughes feel, was a modest hit and went on to be a cult hit. His next movie, Heartbreak Hotel, would be a flop. A story about a teenager who kidnapped Elvis, critics hated it, audiences hated it, and it really underperformed at the box office. Chris, even to this day, admits that it's a movie that no one remembers, or should remember. This failure didn't stop him as he continued to have various scripts sent to him. One of these scripts was for National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Hughes had first hired Columbus to direct the 3rd installment of the Vacation series, but the experience was really bad. He had Chevy Chase to thank, though it shouldn't come as a surprise based on what a lot of people have said about him. Chevy treated Chris like dirt. According to Chris, it was fraught with pain and tension with Chevy Chase, but I needed the job desperately. I had just come off of a film that performed horribly, critically, and commercially, and I thought, maybe I would never direct again. So I took everything in my power to convince myself to resign from Christmas Vacation because I couldn't make the movie with Chevy Chase. He decided to resign before the cameras rolled. He then asked John if he had other projects in the works. It's a good thing that John was a writing machine because 2 weeks later, he received 2 original scripts. One was for Reach the Rock, which wouldn't be made into a movie until the late 90s. The other was for Home Alone. Chris knew that Home Alone had a good story. According to him, I thought there was a really strong emotional context to the film. I had always been fascinated by Christmas, even when I wrote Gremlins. I set Gremlins, which is a very dark story, against the bright, cheery time of Christmas, and I thought it was a good contrast. Christmas is a time when people are at their happiest or at their most emotionally low place in their life. And I thought this was a great backdrop for a kid who's left alone at Christmas. What's astonishing when I found a copy of the first draft of Home Alone was not just how close it was to the final product, but also how detailed it was on everything, including the traps. Hughes seemed to have already written and made the movie in his mind and transcribed it onto paper. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about the pre-production and the casting of Home Alone.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
During both productions of Christmas Vacation and Uncle Buck, both Jon and Chris would send the script back and forth, with some things added and some things cut. Cut were mostly extra dialogue scenes in which Chris felt padded things out a little too much. The biggest addition by Chris was the expansion of Old Man Marley. Now, according to him, the character seems to completely disappear right after he rescues Kevin. He felt that given the emotional and deep dive of the church scene offered on the mysterious character, he didn't like that Jon had written such an ambiguous fate. Chris would add the ending of Marley reuniting with his family at the same time Kevin did with his own. Some other changes were made to the traps, but that's because Chris was already a fan of homemade inventions, as evident in Gremlins, Goonies, and Young Sherlock Holmes. Now, also according to Chris, it goes back to his love for the James Bond series and how gadgets play an essential part. Once they felt they had the right script, the project got set up at Warner Brothers with the agreement that known stars would have to play the adults and the budget would remain under $10 million. This would mean having to choose actors willing to work on the cheap and keeping the filming within reason. This pleased Jon Hughes more than anything, especially when he was given approval to shoot the entire movie in Illinois. Figuring out which adults to place would become a chore, but Chris and Jon had to make an important choice on just who would get to play Kevin. Jon had already been inspired to write Kevin based on Miles from Uncle Buck, specifically from the scene in which he's home alone and Buck's girlfriend comes over to watch them, and they have a funny moment through a mail slide.
I'm Shanice Kowalski. I'm Uncle Buck's friend.
May I see your driver's license, ma'am?
Yeah. Sure. That's a good idea.
Can you please take it out of there?
Jon felt Uncle Buck was like an audition and wanted to cast Macaulay Culkin immediately. Chris did like his performance, but insisted on an audition just to make sure that he was the right choice. The studio agreed. They ended up auditioning hundreds of boys around the same 8 to 10 age bracket. When Macaulay had his turn, Chris too felt he was right. He liked his voice. He liked that Macaulay had bent ears, and he felt that a lot of kids would resonate with him. I couldn't find much on the other kids that auditioned, but according to Chris, a young actor named Jeffrey Wiseman came close. Though he wouldn't get the part, he was given a small cameo as Mitch Murphy, a neighborhood kid who would annoy a driver.
Hi, I'm Mitch Murphy. I live across the street. You guys going out of town? We're going to Orlando, Florida. Well, actually, first we're going into Missouri to pick up my grandma. Do you know the McAllisters are going to France? You know if it's cold there? Do these vans get good gas mileage?
Gee, kid, I don't know. Hit the road.
For Harry, they first approached Jon Lovitz, but he had to say no in favor of doing Mr. Destiny. They then asked Robert De Niro, but he also said no. It's alleged that they also considered Danny DeVito, Bob Hoskins, Dudley Moore, Rowan Atkinson, and Phil Collins. In the end, Chris would turn to another Raging Bull star, Joe Pesci. Chris was always a fan of his work, but was afraid a dramatic actor wouldn't be interested in a family comedy. Upon sending the script to him, they received a surprising phone call, in which Pesci was very enthusiastic. He actually wanted to do something clean for once. According to a rare interview back in 1992, Joe exclaimed, "I thought Home Alone was a great script," in response to why he agreed to do something lighter. He elaborated on it with, "I wanted to play it for the kids because I never get to work with children, you know?" He's slightly correct, though he did do one family movie in 1988, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. He signed on to do Home Alone under the condition that the schedule work around his demand to play 9 holes of golf before shooting anything. Marv, on the other hand, was written with Daniel Stern in mind. Jon and Chris were both fans of his performance in the very underrated 1979 movie Breaking Away. Though apparently Michael Richards and Christopher Lloyd were also considered, Daniel Stern was casted based on an audition that showcased the chemistry he had with Joe Pesci. They casted John Hurd as Peter McAllister and Catherine O'Hara as Kate McAllister, given that both were favorites of Chris Columbus. Jerry Bauman took the role of Uncle Frank when the first choice, Kelsey Grammar, had scheduling conflicts with the show Cheers. Roberts Blossom, who had a long career of playing old men, including Escape from Alcatraz, Christine, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was cast as Old Man Marley. The rest of the roles were filled with local actors, though there's a rumor that Chris Farley also auditioned for the Santa Claus that Kevin talks to. I hope that's true because I would love to see that audition. Production was finally ready to go, though a lot of preparation was required for the stunts and traps to be featured in the film's climax. So how would Home Alone's production go? How did a last-minute phone call get them in contact with John Williams? And how did the movie beat the odds and become a monster hit? We'll cover that in the next episode. Until then, be on the lookout for part 2 of the Home Alone story.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.